This is jazz bassist Brendan Rothwell. You're watching and listening to Jazz Across the Pond with my friends the Jazz Cat and Mr. G. Enjoy the show and keep the music playing.
Well, followers of Jazz Across the Pod, Jazz Interviews Reimagined, I know you must be sitting there and going, well, that's a Razor Khan video. As brilliant as is our former guest. He has been on our show and a favorite of ours. And we may be sitting there going, is it Razor Khan again? No, it's not. It's a gentleman who we've been trying to lure onto our show for the last 6-9 months, and it's a great pleasure to welcome on join us. Our special guest on today's show is an accomplished Anglo-Canadian bassist, composer, and producer with an extensive global radio play of multi-million stream counts across the primary digital musical platform. Try saying that in one breath. His music continues to attract a growing audience. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our great pleasure to welcome all the way from Canada, from all miles away. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us as we welcome on board with us Brendan Rothwell.
Woohoo! Hey, good to see you. Good to see you.
For North America.
Thanks for the intro.
North America. North America.
We'll do this
for
England,
that.
James.
The Union Jack. Now that's it. Now there's relevance to that because our followers are going to be going, where are we going with this one now? The relevance is that our guest tonight was, of course, born in Yorkshire, the home of the Yorkshire pudding in United Kingdom. And of course, he now lives in Canada. So, Brendan, thank you so much for joining us on our show. And that we want to talk more about that Razor Khan bit in a moment. But first of all, let's just take you back to your early days in Yorkshire. And your music, your introduction to jazz music or music, is your musical family, and then eventually we'll then try to find out how you made it across the pond to go to Canada. Tell us more about your childhood.
Well, it's a long time ago, apparently. But Yorkshire it's a wonderful part of the world for sure. And I was born in York, which, if you believe what Yorkshire people tell you, is the capital of the world, obviously. But I was fortunate when I was 6 years old. I actually got a musical scholarship to the cathedral in York, York Minster. So the scholarship meant that I was educated in the church school, the regular things such as maths and Latin, everyday occurrences.
Yeah.
But I also sang in the cathedral every day. So the musical scholarship got me in, and I was taught music and the art of choral singing by a wonderful guy called Francis Jackson. Francis sadly passed away earlier this year. He was, however, 104 years old. MBE, I believe, he was awarded, a whole schwack of stuff. So, from a very early age, the educational piece of music was clearly there. I started playing piano around 2. I'm not sure if it was 2.5. I did watch your chat with Mr. Bromberg. I think he does hold the record, but whatever, who's counting? But yeah, so that's where it kind of started. It was very much a classical piece. Alongside singing, I was playing piano, as I say, and I was playing violin, playing in county youth orchestras, all the kind of expected things. And then at 16 years old, a few things happened to me. My world was somewhat turned upside down with the loss of my father, but it also made me realize many things, one of which is the importance of music to people, because people come and go, but music's always going to be there. So what happened next was a very fortunate chain of events, because I heard Miles Davis had released an album called Tutu, and when I heard that and I heard Marcus Miller playing bass, I decided that the violin was no more for me, and so the bass became my instrument of choice from that day on. So that's obviously quite some time ago, and the early days, certainly in York, sort of learning the craft of playing bass as a teenager, and I was in various kind of rock bands and blues outfits, that kind of stuff. But then I guess I was sort of musically picked up by a drummer in York, who is known to many as LTK. So he's a proper old school trad drummer, and he kind of took me under his wing, and we started doing some gigs, and we had a band together, and it was all, it's all wonderful stuff. But that was really the training for the jazz side of things. And that gets us to around sort of 2021, I guess. I moved to London when I was 19. And so the first couple of decades sort of primarily in Yorkshire, from being born through to learning a little bit about playing bass, and that gets us up to that decade.
Well, you know, Brendan, it's interesting because we've had a lot of people that have commented on Miles Davis, obviously Tutu in particular. But it's interesting though that that would be something that would have driven you. Not interesting, but I just find it fascinating. I mean, sure, Davis secured the 1986 Grammy Award for Best Jazz Instrumental Solo, performance. But what's a little odd is that the response to the project was mixed. I mean, the project only reached number 27 on the Swiss charts, number 33 on the Swedish charts, number 41 on the Dutch charts, 74 in Great Britain, and it only hit 141 on
Wow.
Billboard's top 200. Now, having said that,
Wow.
I think the real story behind Tutu was the composer, arranger, producer, and bassist, which you alluded to, Mr. Marcus Miller, who, like yourself, was also a multi-instrumentalist. Right. I mean, he played soprano sax, and his first love was bass clarinet. Now, as you said, Marcus was what really kind of drove you as far as your interest in electric bass. I mean, you're familiar with upright basses, but it was that whole electric bass sound that got to you. But I think that when you look at his full body of work, talking about Marcus Miller, I mean, he's had a tremendous influence on a lot of people. Obviously, Nathan East, Jimmy Haslip, and Brian Bromberg, former members of Jazz Across the Pond. We've interviewed all those guys, all kind of coming to mind. But what was it, though? I mean, is there really something in particular? Was it just the uniqueness of hearing, that slapping bass sound, or what was it about the way that Marcus played? And then as you grew older and investigated Marcus as a full-blown producer and composer, what was it about Marcus Miller that really flipped that switch for you?
Well, that's a really cool question, actually. I think the irony of being a bass player now is probably not lost on me, because my musical beginnings were singing, and as a boy, you sing high, right? So I was at the higher end of the musical register. Right. When I heard the Marcus Miller bass sound, it was a completely different tone. And of course, whilst Miller's a master of bass playing, fundamental bottom end stuff, he's also a master of lead playing. And so I think the lead bass, the tone and the sound of it, and just the pitch, it's sort of between the two extremes. It's not the super low bass, it's not the super high, like lead guitar or sax or that kind of sound.
Or piccolo bass.
And I think that's maybe right. I think that's maybe why I landed in this sort of mid-section of the musical spectrum, if you like.
Now, I spoke to you on the phone. Sorry, I spoke to you on the phone a couple of days ago just to type finally, and because of course you're from Yorkshire, we got chatting about Miles Gilberdale, of course, Acoustic Alchemy, again former guest on that. Right. We also, excuse me, we also mentioned Mark King of Level 42, an English jazz funk band. Right. And Mark King, of course, really brought to prominence the slapping of the bass, and that being a former drummer. So I know we spoke at length about that and how you admired both. You're very, very good friends with Miles Gilberdale, and so you certainly you got Marcus Miller and a totally different style of playing with Mark King and Miles Gilberdale. So what have you taken from these guys and adapted to your own style?
Well, I think certainly the names you've mentioned, and also players such as Stanley Clarke, right? So you start to listen to all these different tones, and I think from that it's where you find your musical voice, right? I don't sing a great deal anymore. I certainly wouldn't go on stage and be a lead singer. That's not my thing. But I think it's the influence of that. And the Mark King sound, I mean, he was still is, such a machine-driven 16th note player, right? Whereas someone like Marcus Miller, totally different approach, completely laid back, completely relaxed. And both of those types of technique have their place. The Level 42 sound, you go back to sort of early to mid-80s, bands like that, Simply Red, bands like that at the time, certainly in the UK market, were huge. And also, it was a point in time in music and technology where we were starting to see sequencers be used. And so when machines are running at 16th notes and you've got a bass player like Mark King who's playing the same thing, there's a track that I used to call Hot Water. Now I call it Hot Water. But that was kind of a kicker for so many people that wanted to get into playing music, because it was absolutely exact. And this day, I mean, he's still touring. Level 42, they still do their tour, and he still plays it as accurately as he did 35 plus years ago. So I think it's a bit of a kind of melting of all of those approaches together, having grown up with that stuff. And then as you know, we all get older, right? And so we start to formulate our own musical voices. And for me, it's primarily been the bass for a long, long while. And hopefully people now can hear my tone and my style. And it's not simply, oh, he listens to Marcus Miller, right? Because I don't profess to be a Marcus Miller. That's not my gig.
Now, before Kevin kicks in with a question, I saw a wonderful documentary with the late Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, and they were chatting about the wonderful album Asia, and it showed them and how they had to. But the bass player, because he was then getting into what we now refer to as slapping the bass, but he knew that Donald Fagen and Walter Becker wouldn't like it. And so what he did, he positioned his chair slightly, and he was able to do the slapping of the bass. Meanwhile, they didn't know until we went to the recording desk. They went, were you slapping the bass there? And it was just like, because the whole style of playing bass was changing, was evolving as such. It was becoming more of a rhythm instrument, much more prominent, allowing artists like yourself and all the other Kevin's spoke about. And the whole style of bass has changed. So just, it's just a point of it. Kevin, question for yourself, sir.
No, and I think that's well taken. I mean, you sit back and, I mean, we actually, Brendan, you make the 6th bass player that we have interviewed. Could have done it a lot earlier. We could have gotten hold of you sooner. But the interesting thing is that we talked to, I mean, it's been Nathan East, Julian Vaughn, it's been Brian Bromberg, Jimmy Haslip. Who else? Oh, there's Daryl Williams. All of those guys, like yourself, you all have a different sound. And what's come of all of our conversations with everybody, and you've just alluded to it, is that what's been called smooth jazz in the past, it's morphing, because as jazz morphs, everything else does as well. And so all of these different artists are bringing elements. Now, we were talking about Reza Khan earlier. We actually interviewed, wasn't he like our 6th interview, Roger?
Yeah.
I think he was like our 6th interview. And Reza was one of the first ones to talk about how music contemporary jazz is what I call it. I changed the name of my show from, the smooth jazz train to the new jazz train. But the direction that music is taking is people are incorporating all types of elements, whether it's soul or funk, and we hear that in your music too. World music, it started to incorporate those things. And I think that's another reason why you've been so successful. But Brendan, if we go back and look at your first project back in 2016, Time on My Hands, it quickly attracted interest from global radio stations. And your debut single, This Is the Love, secured spots on contemporary jazz charts, not only in 2017, but also into 2018. Now, Mr. Rothwell, there's no doubt your career had a tremendous launch in 2016. You have a loyal worldwide following that's grown exponentially with each of your 3 projects. In one of your interviews, when asked to give advice to young rising musicians, you stated, and I'm quoting, "Listen to and respect the people who discover you and show you support for your work. Never forget them. Learn to recognize those folks, as they may well be foundational in your long-term success. Identify the early adopters and build on those relationships. In the music industry, those contacts can develop into and become long-term allies." Now, when I heard that interview, I had to break into a smile, because the date of September the 23rd, 2017 comes to mind. Does that date ring a bell with you? That was the date. It'll be next month. Next month, it'll be 5 years. Next month, 5 years ago, I introduced you as the newest friend of Mr. G, an artist member of this, what was back then the Smooth Jazz Train. And now here we are. Right. You talk about you must be prophetic, because now here we are, you and I, speaking to my co-host in the UK, the Jazz Cat. Now, 5 years ago, I don't think either one of us would have imagined that some little contact between you and I on Facebook would one day bring us to this point. But it just reinforces your quote. Who are your early adopters? You need to embrace them and keep them, because you don't know where that relationship will go and how foundational they might be for your success. So brilliant quote, and it brought the three of us together. So there you are.
Okay, what we're going to do then, thank you for that, Kevin. Brendan, can you tell us more? We opened up the interview with that fabulous Reza Khan from his 2019, the Last Train Home. Can you tell us more about your relationship with Reza Khan and more about that fabulous album, sir?
Yeah, well, it was one of those, I guess, good news stories that came out of bad. So it was COVID-19 that actually inspired that video to happen. You know, everybody around the world was working from home and doing what they were trying to do and stay away from other human beings. It was all completely alien to us as people, you know. And Reza had sent me a note. He and I had worked on some pieces beforehand, and he sent me a note and said, look, we're going to piece this video together. He'll be in New York at his place, and I think Mauricio, the drummer, was down in Brazil at the time. People all over the world. He said, we'd love you to play bass. And so, of course, I'm going to jump at the chance. And I dusted off my fretless bass and I brought it in here, and we had a couple of takes. And the rest, as they say, is either history or mystery, I guess. But Reza's been very, very kind to me. You know, he's given me some great opportunities. And outside of the video, which we did really as a bit of fun, just to try and cheer people up, it was promoted out through the smoothjazz.com platform as well. So it's a, you know, fairly big audience that got hold of that. But Reza's been a great guy to work with. You know, he also has a business background, as do I. And so we kind of get on pretty well just in conversation, and then musically. And so he actually gave me the chance late last year into the early part of this year to do some more recording. And I'm going to be on a couple of tracks of what will be his next album, which I believe is going to be coming out early part of 2023.
Yeah.
And so I'm playing bass on tracks with Reza and also with Nils and also with Mr. Bob James.
Oh, cool.
So thank you, Reza, for being an early adopter, and to the point earlier about where these things go. That's where it's gone, right?
Well, Reza actually sent Kevin and myself a message last week to tease us somewhat, and he let us know about this forthcoming album. And as your son, Bob James, Jeff Lorben, he went through the list of all these amazing. Your name was on there, and he went through the list and he said, "Guys, I want to promote this album," and I know Kevin and myself are itching to get hold of a copy of that and to start playing it. It's going to be a fabulous album. Now, talking about fabulous albums, you got your new album out. It's an album. It's called Destiny, and it was destined to land on our mat 24 hours ago. So we're giving it a real good play here. We're going to break momentarily from this interview now to let you have a listen to this track. We're going to play a track called Tell Me from our guest tonight, his brand new track. Have a listen to this, and we're going to be back momentarily, and we're going to carry on this fascinating conversation. Back in a second. Well, hopefully followers of Jazz Across the Pond will agree that is a magnificent track, and it is a magnificent album. And I advise you all to add it to your collection, because it is a beautiful album. It really is. So well done. What is the backstory behind this album, Brendan?
Well, you know, the previous album, Sentiment, did really well for me. You know, it got me a '1 with the first single that I put out. And then sadly, it's back to COVID, right? So that was 2019, and then COVID came in 2020. 2021, so last year, I sat down and I thought, okay, I really do want to produce a third album. But the world was still trying to reshape to some extent. People still weren't very clear on what was going on. And I think I've spoken a couple of times, only briefly, about this, but I'm happy to sort of get into it with you guys if you'd like to. It definitely affected how creative brains were creating. I think the social isolation aspects of that showed up in all types of bodies of work, whether it was books that were being written or art that was being drawn or music that was being put together. And so by the fall of last year, I started to listen back to what I've been working on and decided it was not representative of what I want to do and where I want to take my music and my sound and my brand. So sadly, a lot of that was destroyed, but it needed to be, and it needed to sort of go away. And we came back into the start of this year with primarily some fresh ideas. There's a couple of pieces that survived, you know, sort of musical ideas, musical memos, if you like, that I kept, but the rest of it was net new. And so it was a very fast process for me. I think going through last year and sort of the cleansing aspect of having written music to then get rid of that stuff meant I had a very, very fresh approach to what I was going to write and record this time. And also it was a big part of the idea was for me to bring in more of the keyboard aspects of my music as well, because I've played piano for a long, long time, and that, of course, you know, becomes keyboards and synths and all that kind of stuff. But I really wanted to make a few statements in this album with the piano. And so I think, I know I've achieved that. I think people hopefully will also agree with it. And it's not to detract from the bass or the lead bass or the sound I've become known for. If anything, it's to embellish that. And as you work through the album, hopefully you'll hear interplay between lead bass and sort of solo piano, and how that then starts to tell a different story to the previous recordings that I've done.
Kevin.
Well, Brendan, I would say, you know, and again, we'll kind of drop back to Sentiment just a little bit. I was so excited when that project came out. I was very eager for it. And at the time, I said that the difference in your tone, the voice that you had from your first project to Sentiment, that step up was mind-blowing. That was an incredible shift in terms of your musicality, your creativity, your ability to compose, your ability to arrange, you know, as a producer. Then Destiny came out, and it was that, and I was a little concerned after that last one. That was such a big step. Is he going to be able to equal that? And Destiny is probably a bigger gap. There's a bigger gap between Destiny and Sentiment. I think it's an incredible project. I've only played one song. I've had a chance to play one song. The closing track on the project. Very moving for me. And what I loved about it was less is more. You make single key strikes on the piano that resonate. And it is a down-tempo song, no question. But it's not melancholy.
Right.
There's something about it. And I describe it as it's that same comfort you get sitting in a dark room with a flickering candle or in front of a fireplace at night. It's that comfort level you get. You feel secure in the moment. It's very reassuring. The music, though, is absolutely brilliant. I just think, and so we realized listening to your music that you've changed your whole process in terms of how you create music. And I guess, are you relying now more on piano as part of your creative process? I mean, I know that you were trained in piano and violin and voice, but How has that process? I mean, what's made that big step between Sentiment and Destiny? Other than it was your destiny, right?
Other than the obvious, yeah. Well, and thank you for the extremely kind summary of the gap, I guess, between those albums. I think you've got it exactly right. You know, the piano. If you think of melody, so if you go some of the sort of French early 20th century piano music, it's so evocative. You know, you hear it and you immediately know where that was written, and you kind of see yourself on Paris street, whatever it may be. There's so much emotion in music. And I think what I realized as I started to put together what became this new album was that, exactly as you said, less is more. And so it's great to have tracks like Tell Me that we heard, where you've got the bass thumping along and you've got a bass melody line, and all those things are happening that I want to happen in the track that I'm sort of, you know, building for the radio audience. And equally, there's something very beautiful about stripping a lot of that away and landing with the bare bones of music. And so for me, it's melody. I play bass and I love playing the bottom end bass stuff of a track with a band, of course. But the melody aspect of bass is very different, you know, to a piano. A piano is horizontal, you have keys, you kind of move both hands and things happen. A bass is not. It's this way and your hands are the opposite way around. And so thinking about the mechanics of the instrument as opposed to the single notes is very, very different. And I think the two now for me are really, they're trading off really well, and it's becoming a different level of synergy in the playing, and hopefully that's transferring through to the listener. But that's a great point you bring up, though. I have thought about it, but maybe not to that extent. So thank you.
Well, certainly we can hear it. It's it's there. I mean, we just love it. I can't wait to play it on my radio show, as I know Kevin's already featured one track and he'll be featuring more of the tracks on there. As a brand and signature sound, you've become very prominent now, and you've been invited to play along at original tracks with well-known artists from contemporary smooth jazz genres, including Tony Sanders, who I've been very fortunate to interview, the wonderful Razor Khan, and Wayne Gutschall. Now, apart from that, of course, you've also had jamming sessions at the 2020 Jazz Weekender Festival in Carmel, California. Could you tell us more about that? That sounds an absolute blast, that does.
Yeah, it really was, you know, and and it was exactly as you suggest. It was a jam session, so it was at the rather beautiful Quail golf course, Quail Lodge golf course. You know, I mean, that whole part of the world, that bit of California, is something magical about that whole stretch of road and stretch of coastline. So anyway, we rock up, and you know, we were there as part of the audience as much as anything else. My wife and I had been the previous year as well, and hung out and saw people like Boney James. You know, and it's a very small crowd. It's a couple hundred people, and you're real close to the artists. So the 2020 was cool. Everybody was a little on edge because we kept hearing about this thing on the horizon called COVID, and maybe don't get on a boat for a while. But it wasn't a thing. This was February, right? But it was a jam session. So Quail Lodge, I remember I was wandering around, sort of hanging out with the guys from the Peak Project, and Kim Scott rocks up with a flute, and she plays a bit of flute, and then she started singing. I think we did Superstition. She became Stevie Wonder for 4.5 minutes, which was quite amazing. And I remember at the back of the room, there was this little stealthy shadow with a sax case as Dave Cars walks in. And so it's just like this list of who's who, and suddenly I'm in the middle of all this stuff. And of course, Nathan East is the musical host for that event. And so he was around, you know, doing the big stage stuff, and very generous with his time, I have to say. When I've met him a couple of times now, he's always good for a conversation and always good for a piece of advice. So wonderful opportunity. I'm really hopeful that they do put that on again. You know, things keep getting shelved because of the fallout from COVID, and planning those things and the insurance, all that stuff kind of comes together and makes it a bit of an issue. But I'm hopeful that we'll see something in the next couple of years, because Carmel as a place to go and hang out for 3 or 4 days, I mean, I may just do it anyway, quite honestly. Just go and sit by the coast for a couple of days and take in the view, you know.
Well, you mentioned Nathan East. I mean, again, a former guest here on Jazz Across the Pond, and you were absolutely right. He was so humble, he was so generous to give us his time here on the show. And Dave Cos, for followers, Dave Cos, we finally, after a long time working it, he's agreed he's going to be joining us in September. So we're looking forward to that interview, aren't we, Kevin?
Great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, for our viewers' information, the first advanced release single from Brendan's new project, Destiny, which we listened to, is called Tell Me. It was released back on June 13th. Destiny was released globally on July the 1st, or roughly thereabout. Now, I checked the Smooth Jazz Global Radio Jazz charts this morning. And Brendan, you've picked up 3 spots this week. You've got the number 4 spot on Smooth Jazz Global's Listeners Countdown chart, which I love because it's driven weekly by the listeners worldwide. So when they play your music, everybody hits the little heart button. They keep track of all that, and you had the 4th most clicks. That's pretty impressive, especially when it's a worldwide audience. You picked up the number 6 spot on what's called their radar chart, which reports weekly spins. That's another impressive position. And then you've got the number 24 spot on their top 100 album. Now, that unto itself might not sound like it's all that impressive compared to being in the 4th and 6th spot, but that 24th spot is the running point for the whole year. In other words, as of this morning, your project is the 24th most popular project going to the end of the year. You bumped up 3 spots since last week, so hopefully we'll keep pushing that up a little bit. So congratulations on your performance on the chart. Now, so that our viewers also know, Brendan also has the distinction as the first independent artist to hit number 1 simultaneously on all 3 smoothjazz.com charts. Now, I know, Brendan, that you have said, my wish is that listening to my recordings will help the audience understand the emotional connection that I have with music. It is the most influential, subtle, and natural form of communication that I know. Now, there's no doubt that jazz lovers recognize your emotional connection with music. They hear you, and they love your music, and that's why you've kept a presence on the charts consistently since 2016. So congratulations, we hear you. Keep at it.
Amazing cover.
A little scary how much research you've done on this as well, I have to say. That's pretty in-depth.
We like to, our research team, and Kevin and myself like to do our homework. Now,
we pay them big money, don't we, Roger? We
do, yeah. Talking about homework, Brendan, so now you're residing now in Canada. When are we going to see you back in the UK?
Good question. Funnily enough, I was actually on a call with Reza Khan yesterday because we're chatting about a couple of things. We want to try and get some live work going here in the next year, let's just say. And Europe is certainly on the cards for that, and the UK is equally on the cards as part of that deal as well. So we don't have dates yet. I mean, it's literally yesterday we had our first kind of kickoff call to look at logistics of some of this stuff. You know, COVID, Brexit, everything else that's been going on, it's changed the dynamics of travel as well a little bit.
Well, I know we're going to be so
I'm hoping in the next year.
Okay. Well, I know that Acoustic Alchemy do their traditional week in December at the Pizza Express in Soho.
Right.
And there was rumours that you may come over and just be in the audience and make sure you let me know, because I'll be in the audience the same night as well. We'll share a glass of wine.
Absolutely.
You'll have to shave your head though, Roger.
Okay, Brendan, before the curtain comes down on this interview tonight, which we've thoroughly enjoyed, where can our followers buy and obtain your 3 albums, sir?
Well, thank you for that opportunity, because it's a huge deal, as you know. So streaming is a fantastic mechanism. We all love it. Some musicians maybe despise a couple of the platforms. That's politics, and we're not going to go there today. I would say, though, to your point, that buying music is absolutely essential for an independent artist, which is exactly what I am. I don't have a label behind me. Everything I do is self-financed and put together. So for those of you who are interested in purchasing all or any of my albums on CD, my website is the most direct place to go. So BrandonRothwell.com. The good folks at Amazon will equally sell you a copy, but I don't see a great deal of the money that they'll take from you. So going direct is certainly the best way. And equally connect with me. You know, there's a contact page on the website there. I'm more than happy to hear from people. I've had some wonderful conversations and built up some amazing friendships with people in the audience over the last 3, 4, 5 years. So yeah, buying music is a very important aspect, but it's actually only the start of some of these conversations. So by all means, jump in there. The music itself, of course, is on all the major streaming platforms, Spotify and iTunes and all those wonderful places. So social media is a big piece, you know, from a connection and connectivity perspective as well. So Instagram and Facebook, you can find me at Rothwell Bass, last name followed by bass, because that's who I am and that's what I do.
Excellent. Well, it has been an absolute joy and pleasure. It's been our destiny to get you here on the show, which is quite appropriate because that is going to be the title of the track we're going to finish the interview on. Do you like the segue on that? We're going to finish off with Destiny, the title track from the album. Ladies and gentlemen, Jazz Across the Pond, it has been our immense pleasure to have the man himself, Mr. Brendan Rothwell, join us on Jazz Across the Pond. Brendan, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
Thank you, both of you, for this. It's a great opportunity, and we can hook up over 3 time zones, you know, technology aside. It's all good.
It certainly is. Kevin?
Roger? Over and out?
Time out.
Thank you, Brendan. We appreciate it, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay,
from everybody
we'll chat
here,
soon.
from Brendan in Canada, from the United States of America, Kevin and myself in the UK, take care. Look out yourself. Goodbye.